Welcome to the Digital Dreaming Off the Gridiron podcast. It is your host, Oscar Lee. I'm joined today by hardcore wrestling legend, ECW champion, former WWE Hardcore Champion, and the man who's in it all in this industry and business of professional wrestling. And actually, a fun fact: the man who's been in the industry and the company, both WWE and the industry, the only guest of the show who's been on the roster for most of all these belts and behind me. So we are here joined today by Just Incredible. Just, how are you doing today?
I'm great, man. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, doing great. Yeah, no, thank you so much, obviously, for being on the show. Taking time on your busy schedule. Obviously you have a lot of things going on. So yeah, obviously, this is going to be kind of just an organic kind of conversation about, your career, your early life, and kind of, what you're up to
Sure.
today. So yeah, we'll kind of start off, first off with kind of, obviously, everyone knows, how who you are, right, as a star, but kind of what really inspired you to get into the industry of pro wrestling.
I was just a fan, really. I loved wrestling. I grew up in the '80s, so I'm 49 years old. So with the math, I kind of came up right around when Jim Crockett Promotions was really going everywhere with WTBS. Now, I know for a lot of younger people, like cable was a big deal back in the day. And when Jim Crockett, because I live in Connecticut in the Northeast, and when Jim Crockett got on WTBS, people in New York, Connecticut, etc., we were able to watch wrestling other than the WWF or WWE. So it was just something different. I got to, before I never got to see Ric Flair or Dusty Rhodes. You'd only see those guys in magazines, right? That was how, there were no dirt sheets. That's how you got your knowings of other wrestlers and other territories. And it was fascinating to see these guys live on Saturdays. So yeah, it was, just from stemming from that is where I really became, just infatuated with pro wrestling.
100%. No, obviously, we've seen so many other veterans, of the industry, superstars like yourself, who said the same thing. Just being a fan of it, is what inspired them to get into it. So obviously, you broke, and you mentioned kind of, how you broke in at an earlier age. You actually started training when you went to Alberta to join Stu Hart, and obviously your future tag team partner Lance Storm, and actually, which I didn't know, Chris Jericho, who actually ended up being one of your trainers early on in your career. So kind of what prompted the move? Kind of talk to me about that process of first kind of identifying, the Hart, dungeon was where you wanted to go, and that move from Connecticut to Canada.
Sure. Well, it wasn't even really that I wanted to go to Canada, although, it ended up being the best decision I could have made. It was out of necessity. I was working at a grocery store, a local grocery store. I was 18 years old, graduated high school. It was summer, so wasn't thinking of college just yet. I was going to take a year off. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And on my break, you get 15, 20-minute break. I was, in the magazine aisle reading a wrestling magazine and always thinking about, wanting to do wrestling. I was backyard wrestling since I was 14,
Yeah.
and it was pretty good. I understood the concept. But anyways, so as I'm reading this magazine, one of the back pages was an advertisement for the Hart Brothers School of Pro Wrestling, and they showed Brian Pillman, Owen Hart, the Harts, saying that they're one of the best facilities around. And this is you got to understand, this is pre-internet. There's not like advertisements for wrestling schools. You couldn't just Google something. You really had to, writing letters and making phone calls. And it was a lot more difficult. So anyways, they had a phone number, and I gave them a call, spoke to Bruce Hart, found out what I needed to do, how much it was going to cost, etc. And I worked for about a year to save up the money, get a flight, and moved out to Calgary, only because that was the only school I'd ever heard of, not knowing that, there were schools like literally right an hour right down the road, but how, you know what I mean? It's not like it was well advertised, because the business was still very much kayfabe then,
Right.
So it wasn't like out there in the open. So really, that's just how it happened.
100%. No, and that's great. Kind of, like you said, kind of, that drive inside you to figure out, where you wanted to go and how you wanted to make this, dream a reality.
Sure.
I mean, we've seen obviously even like current superstars like Seth Rollins. He had a very similar experience, doing the backyard wrestling, and he basically had to go to Chicago, right? From Iowa, right, going 4 hours every weekend, and
Right.
getting gang guys together. So I mean, talk to me about that. Were you still in Connecticut while you're training in Alberta, or did you move out to Alberta full time and then, train?
Well, back then, I think the Hearts, I don't know if the Hearts do it anymore, but I know Lance Storm was doing it similar to the Hearts. It was a 2-month
Yeah.
program.
Yeah.
And we went up there, like, for example, July 1st, and camp was over at the end of August. So it was literally 8 weeks, Monday through Friday. We wrestled every day, minus Saturday and Sundays off. So that's, per week, that was five classes, 2 3 hours a class, 8 weeks. And at the end of those 8 weeks, you pretty much had the tools, and so I lived up there. They provided us with a really kind of shitty arrangement. We lived in small town outside of Calgary, above a strip club. Just some,
Whoa.
like, yeah, oh yeah, me and a couple of the other guys from the camp um, ended up doing that because that's where there were rooms for rent, right? And the guy that was running the camp, by the name of Ed Langley, he set us up there, and then he would bus us to Calgary in this yellow broken down bus every day for camp. And but I was a kid, man. I was just so excited to be in a wrestling ring and to be learning something that I loved so much. But we started paying our dues then, boy. That's for sure. You know.
Yeah. Obviously taking those bumps and everything, right?
Oh,
Learn the ropes.
absolutely, man. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was wild. I mean, they had us running a couple of miles a day, uh, you know, 500 squats a day, push-ups, sit-ups, running ropes. It was they tried to break you, and they wouldn't just, it was from the time of where they tried to run you out. Like, I remember the class I went to, there were about 9 or 10 wrestlers, no ladies at the time, just guys. And out of the 9 or 10, only two of us made it through to the end, and it was myself and this guy Brett Farrell, who is a wrestler to this day, from Toronto, wrestles by the name of Big Daddy Hammer,
Hmm.
which is a weird name, but and then he's Canadian, so it's all right. But anyways, he's a good friend to this day, and we were the only two that finished. So it was quite physically challenging and even mentally challenging. It really just kind of set the stage for what the business had to offer, as far as working hard and kind of the things you have to do to make it.
100%. I think one of the things that is one of the misconceptions is, I mean, everyone knows this for how many years the industry has been in existence, is the kind of, the whole notion of scripted. And obviously we're going to get into this later, but, kind of the actual physicality and what it takes out of you, and what
Sure.
you have to sacrifice. I mean, so, I mean, obviously, what you just kind of talked to just kind of speaks to that a little bit, in more detail. So appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so let's kind of talk about kind of after you wrapped up, like you said, with your 8 weeks, you're over there with Hart, you kind of have all the tools you need. What was your first kind of, experience, or your first actual, match, and kind of that first promotion you kind of started with?
Well, what had happened then is I came back home, didn't have much success here because, again, contacts were few and far between, and the indie scene was nothing like it is today.
Oh yeah.
Which is, in a way it's good, in some ways it's bad, but like, today it's oversaturated. You'll have any given state, like, Connecticut has probably 3 4 5 indies running on a Saturday night, which is way too much. Back then you had none. You'd have maybe one show in a couple of months span in a certain state. Indies were called, they were like called outlaw shows. They weren't run by a territory or a credible promoter. So what had happened was, in Calgary, they were starting a new promotion called Rocky Mountain Pro Wrestling. So what I ended up doing is, I came home for a little bit, went back out to Calgary, and on October 16th, 1992, I had my first match in Calgary against the guy that I went to wrestling camp with. That guy Brett Farrell, as AKA Big Daddy Hammer, in Calgary on my 19th birthday, and I stayed up there for the next 9 weeks. So I had 10 of my first pro matches in Calgary, and
Wow.
and two of those matches were against. One was against Chris Jericho, match number 4, and match number 7 or 8 was Lance Storm. So there was quite a good group of talent out there at the time.
Absolutely. No, I mean, 100%. Obviously, like you said, and I think that like the credibility, like you said, of like, the promotion, and that's not necessarily, well, obviously the hearts, right? Just, the hearts are the hearts, right? I mean, the credibility of the hearts, and obviously the promotion, obviously, like you said, the ones who were with you and the training, and in the, the hearts, the standard at that point in time, they're basically, the top of the business at that point in time. So it just made sense, I think, to kind of go back to Calgary and kind of get your feet wet like that while you're still kind of green. Right.
Sure, absolutely. And then
Yeah.
after that, my next progression was I came back to the States, and I'd say, January, February, nothing was going on. This is 1993. So WWE was doing a house show at the time in my area, like 20 minutes down the road in New Haven, Connecticut. And I went, I was always taught, if you're going to go visit a show backstage, you bring your gear just in case somebody, and it has happened where somebody no shows, somebody's hurt, somebody gets sick, sometimes you can get a spot that way. So, I'm full of piss and vinegar, I have balls at the time. I walk into the locker room, and I introduce myself to Tony Gurria, a longtime agent, what you guys call producers today. And I said, Tony, hi, my name is PJ Walker, PJ Palaco, whatever. I'm trained by the Hearts. I live in Connecticut. If you need anybody, I'm here just in case. I brought my gear. So he was very kind, let me watch the show from backstage. So at the end of the show, I go to say goodbye and to thank him, for allowing me back there. And he goes, well, we could use some extras. We're starting a new show in Manhattan called Monday Night Raw. You're more than welcome to come down and, get some work. So I gave him my information, and that's how I started doing jobs for the WWE.
100%. Let's talk about that, right? When you kind of, like you said, you got the contract, your first kind of big break, obviously in a major wrestling promotion. At that time, like as we all know, it was only 3 or actually 2 at that time before ECW kind of really kind of got the rolling, and we'll get there in a bit, right? But kind of what was that experience like for you when you finally kind of you got that opportunity, and you were just, like you said, full piss and vinegar, and how was that for you?
It was wild.
Yeah.
Just to be backstage. I remember going there, just looking at, you're in the same locker room as Randy Savage and Shawn Michaels and guys that you look up to and watched on TV, Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, Bobby the Brain Heenan, Vince, everybody. It was just wild. It was wild. I couldn't believe it. It was so intimidating,
Yeah, absolutely. And the kind of like, if viewers didn't see this, I just want to show my shirt. This kind of, the standard at that time, WrestleMania 6. Yeah, the Warrior, Savage. I can't go all the way down, but there's Hart, and obviously Neidhart, and obviously the Hart Foundation, everyone. So, like you said, yeah, it must have been wild. And so, when did you figure out or find out you're going to be, kind of taking on the Aldo Montoya gimmick, and how did that kind of, come into fruition?
Well, I live in Connecticut. WWE's headquarters are in Connecticut, probably 45 minutes down the road. And, I was asked by Tony Gurria, again, one of the producers, that they needed somebody to go to the office and work out with the Undertaker, because they were bringing somebody in to do the fake Undertaker. Remember that gimmick?
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So basically, I was just going in there to work with, I remember his name is Brian Lee, famous Smoky Mountain guy, Smoky Mountain Wrestling. And I was there. It was me, Mark, Undertaker Mark, and Brian Lee. And I'm just basically helping, bump around for him, trying to mimic and, the Undertaker character. So we start on Monday, work all week. And then come Friday, Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson, who was, head of creative at the time, they come down to watch a full dress rehearsal of Brian Lee as the Undertaker. So we run through it. Everything worked out great. And then Pat Patterson starts talking to me after, Vince talking to Taker and Brian and all that. I'm going to end up wrestling him on Monday Night Raw next, for the next week. That's why we were working everything out. And Pat starts asking me, where did you train? How old are you? Just bullshit questions. And then he asked, what nationality are you? I said, I'm Portuguese. And he goes, hey, Vince, this kid's Portuguese. And Vince kind of popped, very good. Yeah. All right. And then Pat asks, do you speak it? And I said, yes, sir, I do. Oh, shit. Hey, Vince, this kid speaks Portuguese. And very good, pal. Gives me one of those. And the whole time they were looking for a Portuguese wrestler.
Wow.
And I just fit I was right place at the right time. And
Wow.
obviously I had the ability, but the whole time they were looking for a Portuguese speaking wrestler. So, and that was it.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of what was that like for you when you first make your debut, right? As Aldo Montoya, and obviously, with the mask and kind of, the gold spandex and everything. How was that like your first experience, on the big stage?
It was very scary. I mean, I'd been on TV as a jobber, but I'd never been on TV as a feature, like as a star, and I never wrestled under a mask either. It was my first, literally I get handed my outfit 2-3 hours before I go on live Monday Night Raw,
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's just wild. Never did any of this stuff before. And Ted DiBiase tries to buy me off to go with his corporation. So I have to do a promo with DiBiase and I got to go out and wrestle. It was just wild, just a lot for, somebody fairly new in the business and first time ever going over in a match on television, like not really knowing how to get over. So it was just, I was ill prepared at the time, but still I made the most of it. And as Aldo, went forward, I started to get better and better. And being on the road, 200, 300 days a year as that character, I started to really become good. And, started to learn, started to work with some really good people. And, by the time of the end of 95, beginning of 96, I really started to hone my craft. Unfortunately, the gimmick wasn't really going anywhere and we all knew it. So, it was what it was. But again, I was working for the biggest company in the world and, learning, on the road.
100%. Kind of what would you say was kind of the biggest lessons that you learned within that first kind of run? Would you say that first 2-3 years?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Just not to take any opportunity lightly, go out there and wrestle every match like it's a main event, which I always try to, because things change very quickly, and just because you're stuck in a bad character doesn't necessarily mean you're always going to be. Just take advantage of every moment you have, and any moment you're on television is again a moment you could use to get over with the fans, to whether how big or small that moment may be. Just always use that opportunity to make the most of it, because you can't take that shit for granted.
100%. And actually kind of segue kind of to my next question, which is kind of, you kind of talked about, obviously opportunity and the kind of the people you worked with, and those relationships. Did you have any favorite matches or any moments or memories from that first run as on the Montoya, and kind of which relationships did you feel like you built behind the scenes?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I had a couple. I really loved I had a couple of things that happened during all the period. I remember having a non-title match against Intercontinental Champion Jeff Jarrett on WWF Superstars at the time was their show, the main show, besides Raw. And Road Dogg Jesse James was the roadie at the time. He was, he was with Jeff Jarrett. So I beat Jeff Jarrett in the non-title match, which then, a couple weeks after that, I got my Intercontinental title match against Jeff Jarrett. And then I lost that, but it was a really cool little angle. Like I beat him the first week, did promos the second week, and then had the title match the third week. But it was a cool little, little program we did. And then also, which I forgot about this, I was doing an angle with Jerry Lawler, where I beat Jerry Lawler too. I was being managed by Jake the Snake Roberts. And I did a little program with Jerry Lawler, and went over on Jerry Lawler on television, which was really cool. So little started to really learn and work with a lot of great guys, and that was a lot of opportunity to just grow then. And I started really, hanging out with guys like Scott Hall and Shawn Michaels a lot, especially towards 96 when Shawn won the title. I was exclusively traveling with Shawn. And what that did for me was I was learning from the best. He was coming into his own. He was about to embark on his first world title run. And I was there for all of it, which was really cool because I got to see how that works, which was intense, but it was really cool.
100%. No, and I mean, like you said, those are all great moments. Obviously, Jeff Jarrett and Road Dogg behind me right there. I mean,
Nice.
they're also relatively green at the time too, but they were kind of coming into their own. And you, like you
Yes.
said, like there's a kind of an array of future main eventers, basically
Yeah.
kind of coming into and what would be the precursor to the Attitude Era. But now, kind of, we talk about, like you said, the Aldo Montoya gimmick came to an end, like you met reference, and you did have those relationships with Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and like you said, around '96, that's when the curtain call happens. They end up going to WCW. Did you see WCW as any potential opportunity? I mean, I read that you did, but
Oh
I just
yeah.
want, yeah. So,
Oh yeah.
okay.
Um, I mean, I'd gone to Vince, because Scott and Kevin both said, if you get out of because I still had a year left on my contract. I signed in '94, and those are generally 3-year deals.
Mm-hmm.
So my contract was up in '97. So Scott's like, just get your release, and we'll get you a gig down here. I said, cool, because they weren't doing anything with me, and I was really starting to get good in the ring. You know what I mean? I wanted to do something else. I know Aldo was great for a beginning gimmick, but it was what it was. We all understood that. I understood that. That's why maybe I think they put the mask on me too. Was like, we could unmask them later, and hopefully the fan. You know what I mean? This was
Yeah.
really before smart marks were a thing. But for the general public, you know what I mean? It's a different character, different human.
Right.
So I went to Vince's office, set up a meeting, and I said, Vince, I appreciate everything you've done for me, but I'd like my release. I'd like to go somewhere else and have opportunities somewhere else. And Vince said no. He goes, I'm not going to give you your release. I said, he goes, we've invested a lot in you, and we think you have a future here. I was like, okay. So what do you propose? He goes, well, we'll send you down to Memphis, which was at the time their NXT.
Yeah.
In reality, that's what it was. And go down there for a while and learn how to work as a heel. And we'll bring you back up under a heel character. So I went down to Memphis, did my time there. But after the 6 weeks, I was just done. They weren't paying me enough financially. I was losing money because I had, I don't think people understand that WWE really doesn't, especially at this time, was not paying guys a lot. I was making $500 a week, guaranteed. And, $500 a week. How am I going to, pay for a place in Connecticut and a place in Memphis and a rental car and my own car? I was losing like big time. So, last week I was supposed to be in Memphis. ECW was there doing an angle with Jerry Lawler, and I met Paul Lee, and Chris Candido was a good friend of mine. And he's like, why don't you come to ECW? And long story real short, that's what had happened. Paul Lee, got my release from Vince in the fact that I could go right to ECW and not go to WCW, and that's what happened.
Wow, no, that's incredible. Yeah. And actually, no, that's no pun intended, but that's kind of like you just talked about what we segue to.
Yeah.
So talk me about being Paulie, ECW just kind of coming to the fold. And I think you joined right after they had their first pay-per-view, right? Or did you join right before that?
The second pay-per-view I was on. I was on every pay-per-view ECW ever had, minus the first one, Barely Legal.
Very legal, right? So kind of
I was
talk
there
me.
for all of them almost.
Right. Yeah. And talk to me kind of, because we've heard obviously all the ECW originals, Belbra, Bully Ray, or Devon, so many different platforms. Tommy, right? Talk about, Paulie's such a genius. We all know how much of a genius he is today, but he was a guy that we would go to war for. Kind of when you first met him, kind of what did you gain, from that first interaction, and did you kind of build that rapport and kind of that relationship immediately?
We kind of built it immediately. He was very charismatic, very passionate, and ECW was really growing at this time. I mean, I remember, expecting a lot less and going to these arenas, and they were packed, small arenas, but 2,500 people on a nightly basis at times. And, it was just, it was something I'd never seen before. The crowd was so passionate. Everybody was just it was on a different level. And I'd never worked around a territory like that. WWE we were in big arenas, but a lot of times when I was there, and those arenas were half empty, if not more than half empty. And being in ECW, where the arenas were much, much smaller, but they were jam packed and very passionate, it was like a whole new way to perform, and more intimate, but way more fun. And you were allowed to do anything you wanted to do, really, to create. So from a creative standpoint, it was just it was amazing.
100%. So talk to me about when you first when you make your debut, and kind of when did Just Incredible come into form, and when did that kind of that idea become a reality?
Really, right out the gate. I think the first match I had in ECW was as Aldo, believe it or not, because all I had was my Aldo gear. That was on a Friday night in Queens, New York. I kind of wrestled as Aldo against Chris Candido, because we had a really good match from WWE that we'd always do around the horn, around the loop. And so we did that match, and I kind of took the mask off, threw it into the crowd, and said, fuck WWF, I'm with ECW now. And, whatever, it was what it was. But then Saturday was the next show at the ECW arena. And I just had my Aldo gear. And Paulie's like, get on some jean shorts, wear some black boots, go to Walmart, get some black high-tech boots and jean shorts, and we'll give you an ECW t-shirt. Seemed to be the uniform back then in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
So I did that, and he had the name Just Incredible. He'd had that name for a while, that one of the other wrestlers, Wild Bill Wiles, actually had pitched for himself, but Paul ended up buying the gimmick from him and giving it, the name at least, and giving it to me. And my first match at the ECW arena was both myself and Jerry Lynn debuting in ECW. His first match and my first match were against each other, and I went over on Jerry Lynn that night, and hence the start of the gimmick.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's credible. I mean, it's kind of like you said, Paulie had this vision in his mind, but just he was looking for the right candidate to kind of just put it on and kind of see what happened. So now, obviously, like you said, you made your debut, and you talked about kind of what the experience was, and how how it was just growing massively. So kind of talk to me about that run, obviously, and then the first couple of years, and then the Impact players forming with your former trainer, and kind of Heart Dungeon made Lance Storm.
Yeah, I mean, it was just it was so different from the WWE. It was so I mean, we only wrestled 2 nights a week, Friday and Saturday, at that time in the early days. We then started doing 3 nights a week as it got bigger, but it was just so refreshing, so good. I was making as much money, if not maybe a little more, in ECW that I was in the WWE, believe it or not, because my position on the card was higher.
Yeah.
And I was getting a bigger piece of the pie. So, and it was just, again, I was working with great people, actually getting a push, and I was working hand in hand with Paul. And Paul taught me a lot about, what it takes to kind of, just really strategies, and how to act in the ring, and how to maximize certain situations, and when you're telling a story. Just got a lot of great excuse me, a lot of great education. And then I started working with guys like Sabu, and again, I already said it, Jerry Lynn, the Dudleys, Tracy Smothers, Tommy Rich, just so many great, I mean, I can go on and on, just so many great guys. You can't help but get better. And then too, there's not that many rules when it comes to what you can do and what you can't do. You're pretty much allowed to do whatever you want to do as far as telling a story in the ring. So it really just allowed me to be creative.
That's one thing I noticed about ECW, and that's one thing that, like you said, the guys you mentioned also said, on record to say, Paulie enabled that creativity, to
Sure.
kind of that independence. So, when did the kendo stick? Was that your kind of idea, or was that, how did that come into it?
That was Paulie's idea. And
Yeah.
the reason he gave it to me was Sandman was leaving for WCW.
Oh wow.
And, so the whole angle was based on, well, if he's going to leave, then I'm going to take his kendo stick. Right.
Yeah.
And as simple as that, I drove Sandman out of ECW and I took his precious kendo stick. So that was a storyline, which was great. Again, it's I got lucky in getting all these cool little tidbits, right?
Yeah.
So it was cool. It was nice, very nice.
So talk to me about, like you said, you said you started working with so many great talents, obviously all legends across the board for the original ECW. Talk to me about when you kind of saw that Justin Credible was going to become a main event player. Obviously the Impact players came to fruition. You can talk about that as well, but when did you see that Justin Credible was going to become a kind of legitimate single star in ECW?
It- I don't know. It just happened so quickly.
Yeah.
Paul really just he saw the future in me. He saw this guy who was 27 years old at the well, no, I started there at 20, 23, 24.
Yeah.
And and he just figured, wow, this kid's so good at 23, 24. Not to be like that, but just he's healthy, he's in good physical shape. I was working out, I had a decent physique. um I The sky was the limit, you know what I mean? Because everybody was getting older too. I mean, Shane Douglas was, even though he was young at the time for us now, but still Shane had about 10 years on me. And Sandman was, had 10 years on me. So he saw this 23, 24-year-old guy with all this potential. And he's like, this is the horse, him. It was me and Van Dam, really. And I remember Paul specifically not letting Van Dam and I ever touch and we never got to do this feud, but the big payoff was me and Van Dam one day, kind of like a Sabu and Taz, where we had never touched, and it was going to be the big money match in ECW, which unfortunately never happened because we went out of business. But that was going to be the deal.
100%. No, like you said, it happened organically. And one thing that I remember just so vividly was that, man, the amount of fucking bumps you took. I was like, holy, and like you said, selling and making it look like overly,
Yeah,
impactful. So
yeah.
was that also, like you said, from Paulie, or was that just kind of like a combination of,
That was just me. That was
yeah,
just me,
yeah,
from loving Shawn Michaels and Kurt Hennig and Ric Flair. And and one thing, man, and I hate to, I don't even want to take the mystique away, but a lot of that stuff was not as bad as people think.
yeah.
Everything was controlled. The bumps were actually easier than in the WWE because that ring was like cement, and ECW had a great ring, so it wasn't as bad as it looked. I was just selling it like $1 million.
100%. You definitely did. So talk to me, like you already mentioned kind of the stars you work with. What was your favorite moment, and kind of when that buildup kind of started for you to kind of get that world title push? Can you talk to me about that a little bit?
I found out I was getting the world title literally 3 matches before it happened.
Wow.
It was during the time where, and I'm sure you'll remember this, where Taz or Mike Awesome was leaving for WCW.
Yeah.
And he dropped the title to Taz, and Taz was in WWE.
Yeah.
So it was a WCW guy and a WWE guy wrestling for the ECW title, which is wild. That would never happen today.
Clusterfuck.
Yeah. And so then, anyways, long story short, Dreamer ends up winning the title from Taz at the ECW arena. I find out 3 matches prior that I'm going to go in and challenge Dreamer right after his match with Taz, and Dreamer becomes the shortest reigning world champion in the history, and drops it to Justin Credible, and then the rest is history, brother.
The rest is history. Yes, sir. And so tell me, like you said, you were basically the last, in my opinion, your last true champ, because the last year, like you said, of ECW, before they actually did go bankrupt and, obviously get acquired by WWE along with WCW. So was there any difference, would you say, kind of in that last year, that 2000 year, during your run as champion versus any of the other previous years for any of the, like, did you see a difference, like maybe any difference at all from, I think, the audience or the engagement or anything from that end?
the sad thing is the engagement was going up. The
Yeah.
buildings were there were more people in the buildings. From a business standpoint, we were selling more tickets than ever.
Yeah.
Our average attendance was around 3,000 people, which is wild comparatively speaking to what we were doing maybe 2 years ago. But we had just, with us losing TNN to WWE and having to pay for television again, it's like we were making the money at the gate. The interest in ECW was rising. Unfortunately, we had made a lot of bad business decisions, and we were paying people an awful lot of money to stay in ECW and not jump ship during the Monday Night Wars. So Paul just got into a hole. We were certainly doing well, but we were spending more. Regardless of how well you do, if you're spending more than you're bringing in, I was making $3,000 a week. Guaranteed,
Yeah.
which is, that's $150,000 to wrestle twice a week.
Yeah.
That's not a bad gig, and a lot of people were making the same, or, the top people were anyways.
Yeah.
So I just think Paul got himself into, and we were just a deal or two away from still being around today, which is what breaks my heart, but it is what it is, man.
100%. I heard Paulie talk about that, on his podcast or Stone Cold, podcast when he had him on. He said the choke points, obviously, except the TV deals, and and the fact that the deals and I guess the broadcaster still owed the ECW the promotion money, and they still hadn't paid up. So it really sucks.
If we'd have got that money a couple of months earlier, we'd still be in business.
Oh man, heartbreaking. Man. Okay, so kind of talk to me about kind of like you said, the dissolution, and I mean, before we get into that, what was your favorite moment during your run as world champ during that time?
I don't have a favorite moment, just the entire thing.
Yeah.
I just remember it as a period. I don't, because that was a long time ago. I just remember night in, night out, whether it was Chris Chetty, Danny Doran, because Paul would put me in matches with all kinds of people. I would wrestle somebody different every night, which was also very refreshing.
Yeah.
And I always had the match of the night with those guys as a world champion, I tried to do the Ric Flair thing. Like, even though they're underdogs, I tried to make it look like they were going to win the title that night. And I succeeded, which was very, very, very rewarding, very cool. And that's what I remember the most, is just really killing it on the house shows. I remember Gabe Sapolsky, former writer for Ring of Honor, went on record as saying that I was, for the stretch of time that I was the world champion, I had the best matches of any ECW world champion he'd seen, which was a huge compliment coming from a guy like that, So, yeah, I was very proud of that.
100%. A lot to be proud of. Great memories for myself and many other fans, of the promotions. You definitely have a lot to hang your hat on there. So talk to me about, obviously, like you said, the dissolution the next year, and then obviously WWF acquiring you and you coming into the fold of the new kind of alliance storyline, along with many of your other peers. What was that kind of situation like for you, and kind of how was that just kind of be thrust back in with the X Factor?
I thought X Factor could have been a great tag team. Tag team wrestling was really, really big in the WWF at the time. You had the Dudleys, the Hardys, Edge and Christian, me and X-Pac, APA. So you had a ton of Benoit and Jericho were a team at one point.
Yeah.
And, it was just amazing. And we had a decent little run as a tag team. Could have done much more, but I think X-Pac had some stuff going on with the office, and which led to us breaking up a little bit earlier than I thought. I thought we could have been in a great chicken shit heel team.
Yeah.
That was the point of Albert being there. He was supposed to be kind of like the guy that would help us cheat to win.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it didn't, it worked for a minute, but it didn't go as far as it could have. And then all of a sudden, Vince buys WCW.
Yeah.
And the alliance happens. And that just all storylines and all bets were off then. And that's where, a lot of people got lost in the shuffle, because literally you have the cream of the crop, of pro wrestling all under one roof. And you're just vying for time. And I was just lucky to have a job and be on TV at that point. So, but no, all things considered, Dreamer was also in that spot. A lot of the guys were in that spot, so I wasn't the only one. And we did the best we could. I was making a lot of money for the WWE at that time. And, you know, it was good until it ended in 2003. And from there, I went to All Japan, had some tours there, worked for TNN, or TNA, excuse me, TNA,
Yeah.
when in its infancy. And then went back to the WWE for the relaunch of ECW in 2005.
Yeah.
You know,
Talk to me about a little bit about that TNA run in the infancy, because I did have Ken Shamrock on the show, who was the first ever NWA champion, you know, back then in 02. And obviously your relationship kind of with Jarrett, you know, and with the Jarretts, right? I'm sure probably and Road Dogg probably may have played some role in that, you know. So what was that like for you in TNA? How would you kind of characterize your TNA run?
it was fun. It was fun. There was a lot going on, you know,
Yeah.
a lot going on backstage. The money was horrible
Yeah.
at the time. They really didn't, it wasn't Dixie Carter's TNA at the time yet. It was still run by Jerry Jarrett. And I just remember myself and Jerry Lynn having a match. And it was a very good match, best match of the night. And Jerry Jarrett, I guess Jeff Jarrett had to go on and defend the NWA title after us. And Jerry Jarrett goes to Jeff in the production meeting, well, if you can't have a better match than them, why'd you put them on before you?
Yeah.
So we got a little bit of heat for being too good. And both Jerry Lynn and I didn't come back for a while after that. So that's how that went.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, politics and all that bullshit backstage, I just can't, you
Yeah.
know. I mean, it is what it is.
It was, you know, but again, it's what it is. So
So now, obviously, like you said, you reinserted yourself back in WWE for the second ECW run, which was really good in the first kind of, I was not say the conceptual form in ECW One Night Stand 05.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So talk to me about that.
I mean, you know, we got the call that Vince was going to put together. We weren't told that it was going to be a thing yet. We were just told to come back for one more pay-per-view. They're going to do this thing called One Night Stand. And where I came, you know, it was Lance Storm and Chris Jericho, funny enough. And they were the opening match. And during the match, I come down and I, you know, hit Chris Jericho with the kendo stick, causing Lance to win.
Yeah.
And then we do the Impact Player pose, and which was really cool and a lot of fun. And then we came back out later that night for the Dudley's Dreamer Terry Funk match, where I pile drive Dreamer on barbed wire. So we bookended the show. We were in the beginning and at the end. So that was a very successful show for us, and a great show, because it brought out the best of what ECW was, and it was truly an ECW feel to it. You know, that was as legit as a WWE ECW show could have been, you know.
Did you feel like that should have been the storybook ending to ECW?
Now looking back, yes, I wish it could have been, because, you know, the reason it didn't work, and I was part of the relaunch and the reboot. I had CM Punk's first match,
yeah,
for Vince in the WWE, for Vince's ECW, which I'm very proud of. That was a good match and all that. But yeah, I wish the One Night Stand would have been the end, because, you know, we were the rebels. We were the anti-establishment. That's what made us cool. There was a lot of other things that made us cool, like the music and the attitude, but there was no way that the WWE and Vince McMahon was going to allow us to be ECW. And you can't rage against the machine, so to speak, when you are the machine. No, you know what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. No, I totally agree with you.
I wish they were. You're right. I wish they would have just left it alone with One Night Stand.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it had to do with kind of, like you said, sci-fi promotion, the branding, and obviously making
all
something
of it.
else. All of it. Yeah, it's just yeah, the concept is nice, but you know, when you actually, you know, deliver it, yeah. So, but I mean, one match you mentioned, CM Punk, was you had your first match in ECW, his first kind of main match in the WWE, which, like you said, something to be proud of. And then, but I want to also talk about kind of, you know, I saw the match you had with Kurt Angle, because Kurt Angle, you know, he said he was completely against being in ECW at that time, but because the fact he had that history, that one kind of, you know, the one-off incident, you know, when he was there, you know, and then he made that appearance, you know, before he broke into WWF, you know, I think that's why, you know, Vince wanted to bring him in to kind of, because there was some credibility kind of there, but it really wasn't the same kind of feeling. So, but what was it like for you working with these kind of other stars like Kurt Angle, like more like, you know, a little bit different, than traditional?
Yeah, it wasn't the same, because I wasn't being treated as world champion Just Incredible. I was Just Incredible, the job guy, not the ECW world champion. Mm-hmm. You know, and I was, you know, it was just a different situation, and you could feel where that was going with Vince's guys already. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But one thing I want to give you credit for, because you took some insane bumps in that match too against Kurt. I was like, how the fuck are you still doing this after what 15 plus years, you know?
Yeah, it's what you do, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. No, because it's like you say. Because one thing about Kurt, which I love, because he's also been on the show. Like makes you feel like it's real, but kind of to you, obviously, like you said, the bumps. Like I still don't. There's no one who's taken bumps as hard as you have and sold it as well as you have to make it just feel like, oh my god, this invigorating pain. You know. So
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
100%. So let's talk about, like you said. So when did that run finish, and then kind of when did you kind of break into the indie scene?
2006 it ended. I ended up just quitting. It just wasn't financially. We were on a very low downside. I think it was like 52 grand a year, which is preposterous.
Yeah.
Least amount of money I'd made in the business. So after I saw it going nowhere, I told them I'm not interested anymore. And that was it, you know. And then I just kind of went to do indies for a long time, and just kind of in a way it was very anticlimactic, but I just did indies till today, really.
Yeah.
Even though I'm semi-retired, nothing of note, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think kind of to your point, did you, because you like you said, the indies were when you left ECW, WWE, ECW, the indies were kind of coming into form as becoming
Sure.
that major third, so did you kind of see that immediately, or was that kind of later on, your run?
That was more later on. I wasn't, at that time, I wasn't really thrilled with where the business was headed. I wasn't in the best places, emotionally, physically, mentally. At that point, I'd kind of given up. And just really wasn't, you just kind of saw the writing on the wall that was, because unless you're working for a company, and again, there was no viable competition until AEW came along, which was years and years before that. So it's just, unfortunately, it was just the indies or bust, and it wasn't even what it is today. So I just kind of saw it for what it was, and just, that was it.
Well, yeah, but I want to say now to highlight kind of I guess the exclamation point of your career, obviously being inducted in the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame and many other Hall of Fames. Kind of what did that symbolize when you got that call?
I mean, it always feels good to know that you've done something in the business, that you're respected, that you're, credited for doing something, and again, my biggest claim to fame is the fact that very few people could say that they were a world champion. I'm not saying a world champion for, an indie promotion. I'm talking about a legitimate world championship with a pay-per-view company. I mean, I've headlined more pay-per-view, I've headlined more ECW pay-per-views than anybody in ECW. And the fact that I did that, fact that I was world champion, 2-time world tag team champions with Lance is great. And that's something I didn't think I would have ever gotten. So, that's something I'm really proud of.
100%. No, definitely a lot to be proud of. So let's talk about some funny moments, because I think, obviously the hardcore championships that you won in that second year, obviously the O2 run in WWF, when they're kind of getting to the point of basically, dissolving the belt. Obviously, there's matches where just basically, you come in and you basically, kick some guy or like, you hit them with a candlestick and then you get the pin. So, I mean, you obviously became an 8-time hardcore champion. I mean, did you enjoy that at all? Or kind of what was that for you?
I mean, it was fun. It was fun for what it was,
Yeah.
I didn't take it too seriously, but it's funny because when you look at that accolade now, for people that don't know, that's it still sounds impressive. So I'll take it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I'll take it.
100%. One thing I noticed, I think on Stone Cold's podcast with Undertaker, I think they're talking about something where there's like a test of strength and then the daisy chain headlock, and then they referenced you. They said, "Yeah, just incredible." Yeah, what was your thought process instead of going in the back or the front? They said you could have been king of the world. I'm not sure about that, so can I talk about that if you don't mind?
I don't even know about it anymore. To be honest, I don't remember it. I remember it, but I don't remember it. But I just know it was funny.
Yeah, 100%. All right. I think, so once again, appreciate you kind of, coming on here talking, with me.
Of course, man.
Yeah, 100%. So hopefully we can do this again soon. Any closing thoughts, and any kind of, any objectives, coming up?
No, I'm just, I'm very great. First of all, thank you for having me, man. It's been a fun conversation. Just, I'm grateful for everything I've gotten. I'm 49 years old. I'm blessed to have made it out alive out
Oh
of this
yeah,
crazy business, because there was a time too in those eras where a lot of people, we lost a lot of good people, and I'm doing okay. I've moved on. I got a good job today, and, still doing wrestling once in a while, and life couldn't be better.
100%. Actually, no, I'm sorry. I have to ask you another question because what you just said. You mentioned Kurt Hennig, guys you idolize, and you saw kind of the drug use. And Kurt Hennig said something to Brock Lesnar about get in to get out. Was
Yeah.
that ever something that was communicated to you, and is that whatever mindset you had?
And no, it wasn't, unfortunately, but it is what it is. I
Yeah,
wish it was, but you never will. But once you're in, you never want to get out. So
yeah, it's a rush. All right, well, thank you, Justin, once again. Thank you so much for your time today,
thank you
and
so much.
yeah, hope we can do it again soon.
Yes, sir.
All right.